In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, February 3rd, economy-related officials reaffirmed their commitment to supporting export and investment efforts by Korea's manufacturing industry amid lackluster global demand. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank raises its rate by 50 basis points, pushing forward with a tight monetary policy, even as some of its global peers slow their pace. And hackers with ties to North Korea steal some $1.7 billion from crypto investors last year to fund Pyongyang's missile and nuclear activities. We begin on the local economic front, which Seoul's top finance official has pledged to prop up by supporting export initiatives and slashing the red tape on investment-related activities. Our trade correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea is still struggling with sluggish exports, posting a record-high annual trade deficit last year and the highest monthly deficit last month. To address the issue, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-woo on Friday discussed the economy with other senior officials.
South Korea's economic conditions, including exports and investment, are expected to be tough at least until the first half of this year. The government will make all-out efforts to support our company's exports and investments to revitalize the economy and bring about a faster economic rebound.
Meanwhile, Trade Minister Lee Chang-yang pointed out the struggles that companies are facing under the economic slowdown.
When considering the decline in chip demand, which takes up about 20% of the country's total exports, export conditions this year are expected to be tough. The situation for investment in equipment and R&D is similar as well. Firms are hesitant about investing due to failing demand, high interest rates, and high inflation.
However, despite the difficulties, firms from 10 major manufacturing sectors like semiconductors, cars, and batteries pledged to make investments this year worth 100 trillion Korean won, or around $82 billion. To help those sectors, Lee said that the government will actively support exporters by providing a record trade financing of 360 trillion won, or around $290 billion. It will also use 2/3 of its annual exports budget in the first half of this year and help domestic firms enter foreign markets. For better investment, it vowed to discover and resolve regulatory issues that hinder corporate investment. It will also provide tax support. He said that during the first half of this year, when economic conditions are expected to be difficult, the government will closely monitor and support exports and corporate investments for a stronger economic recovery in the second half of the year. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
And staying with the economy, Korea's growth outlook for this year has been lowered amid sluggish domestic consumption and exports. The Korea Economic Research Institute on this Friday lowered its projection to 1.5% from its earlier forecast of 1.9%. The latest figure is also lower than that of the International Monetary Fund, which believes the Korean economy will expand 1.7% this year. Meanwhile, researchers at the local institute have also said Korea may enter a full-fledged recession this year. Meanwhile, in a clear contrast to the small step hike taken by their U.S. counterparts, authorities at the European Central Bank have announced intentions to raise their interest rates by 0.5 percentage point. What's more, the same hike has been forecast for March as well. Our Yoon reports.
On Thursday, the Governing Council of the European Central Bank decided to raise the three key interest rates by another 50 basis points. This brings the interest rate on the main refinancing operations and the interest rates on the marginal lending facility and the deposit facility to 3%, 3.25%, and 2.5%, respectively. Though the Governing Council is making efforts to ensure that inflation returns to its 2% target, the latest announcement comes with grim news, as interest rates are expected to be raised by another 50 basis points at the next monetary policy meeting in March. This follows the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision on Wednesday to raise its benchmark interest rate by 0.25 percentage point. That was the 8th increase since the beginning of this cycle of hikes in March 2022. And while there is little indication of when the hikes will end, experts say that progress is being made in the battle against inflation. The Bank of England also announced an interest rate hike of 50 basis points, bringing the policy rate to a 14-year high of 4%, which was expected. But on an optimistic note, the bank's statement dropped the word forcefully from language on future hikes, in line with their forecast of a much shallower decline from what was projected back in November. Inflation in the UK has eased, coming in at 10.5% in December, down slightly from 10.7% in November, and a sharp decrease from 11.1% in October of 2022. 이은진, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., Foreign Minister Park Jin and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will work together to ensure a possible and productive summit between their two leaders in Washington in the near future. During talks at the White House on Thursday local time, Park also said they should create a, quote, alliance for the future, noting that this year marks the 70th anniversary of the two countries' ties. The latest talks come a day ahead of Park's meeting with his U.S. counterpart Antony Blinken, during which a host of issues, including North Korea, will be addressed. The Yoon administration is reportedly hoping for a summit in the U.S. as early as April. And the United Nations remains committed to engaging with North Korea. In a briefing on Thursday, the UN pledged to pursue dialogue, which it believes is the only way for lasting peace, as well as complete and verifiable disarmament of nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula. The remarks came in response to a question about Pyongyang's latest bitter rhetoric, in which it vowed a nuke-for-nuke response to Washington's security-related activities here in the region, including joint air drills with Seoul. Separately, White House officials on Thursday also shared their support of dialogue with North Korea, pointing out that the drills are part of regular training. Meanwhile, pundits have long claimed that North Korea relies on hacking to fund its missile and nuclear ambitions. Well, a new report appears to support these claims and adds related hackers stole some $1.7 billion from crypto investors last year. Here's our North Korea affairs correspondent, Han Sung-woo.
In a report released earlier this week, U.S.-based blockchain analysis firm Chainalysis said that North Korea-backed hackers stole roughly $1.7 billion in cryptocurrency heists last year. That's about 44% of the total $3.8 billion stolen in crypto hacks in 2022, which the firm called the biggest year ever for hackers. This comes despite the market floundering last year, with various crypto trading companies collapsing and investors suffering huge losses. Typically, North Korea-backed hackers, such as those from the cybercriminal syndicate Lazarus Group, launder crypto through mixers, which mix cryptocurrencies from various users to hide the origins of the funds. Pyongyang has officially denied any allegations of crypto theft, but according to an expert panel monitoring United Nations sanctions, the regime has relied more and more on hacking to fund its weapons programs, as publicly declared trade declined under sanctions and COVID-induced lockdowns. That means crypto hacking could currently make up quite a large chunk of North Korea's economy. Chainalysis predicts, however, that the heists will get harder and less fruitful with each passing year, mentioning that American law enforcement, for the first time last year, had seized $30 million in funds stolen by North Korea-backed hackers. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
On the local pandemic front, daily tallies are reportedly maintaining their downward trend, even amid the eased indoor mask requirements. But health authorities here are calling on the public to remain vigilant against the virus. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
The number of new COVID-19 cases in South Korea continues to see a downward trend, with the latest figures marking the lowest Friday tally in 31 weeks. Just under 15,000 cases were reported. That's half the number of infections recorded a week earlier. In a disaster management meeting on Friday, South Korea's second Vice Health Minister Bang Min-soo assessed the current virus situation as stabilized despite the Seollal holiday late last month and the lifting of the indoor mask mandate for most settings. Starting last Monday, people were no longer required to wear masks indoors, except for at medical facilities and on public transportation. The number of critically ill patients has also been on the decline for 3 weeks in a row. As of Friday, some 339 people are reportedly in critical condition. Despite this welcome news, Park emphasized that people should remain vigilant against the virus, citing the WHO's latest decision to maintain its highest alert level for COVID-19. He also asked people to actively practice quarantine measures, such as wearing masks at high-risk facilities, to ensure the downward trend continues. Meanwhile, the Ministry of the Interior and Safety on Friday said it recently advised local government to refrain from sending emergency text messages to residents on new daily infections. This comes amid complaints over warnings that are seen as unnecessary given that infections are dropping and a feeling that repeated alerts would undermine the significance of emergency text. Regarding the decision to stop sending out texts, the second Vice Health Minister, however, warned that now is not a time for complacency and pledged to thoroughly manage the quarantine and response system. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Over in Ukraine, the European Union has detailed unfaltering support for Kyiv and fresh sanctions for Moscow. Now, this comes ahead of a meeting between the leaders of the EU and Ukraine on Friday, local time. Our Isung has the latest.
With the Russian invasion of Ukraine nearing its one-year anniversary, the EU is continuing its military support for Ukraine. After holding talks with Ukraine, the EU Council announced Thursday that it plans to provide additional military aid to Ukraine to the tune of 500 million euros or $545.5 million through the European Peace Fund. EU member states also announced that they will contribute an additional $49.1 million to train Ukrainian soldiers. The decision was made to provide technical education and special training to accelerate the deployment of the German-made Leopard 2 tanks. In addition, the EU has also promised over $27 million to help clear landmines threatening the Ukrainian people. Meanwhile, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, during her fourth trip to Ukraine since the outbreak of the war, announced further sanctions against Russia over its aggression. She said that the 10th package of sanctions issued by the European bloc will be implemented on February 24th, exactly 1 year on from the outbreak of the Ukraine war. She added that in addition to the sanctions, Russia needs to be held accountable for its war crimes against Ukraine, with a dedicated center set to be established in The Hague to do just that.
Russia must be held accountable in courts for its odious crimes. Prosecutors from Ukraine and the European Union are already working together. We are collecting evidence. And as a first step, I'm pleased to announce that an international center for the prosecution of the crime of aggression in Ukraine will be set up in The Hague.
Von der Leyen is set to hold talks with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and EU Council President Charles Michel on Friday, where the three sides will announce additional support measures and cooperation plans, including tariff-free benefits for Ukrainian exports and cooperation in the renewable energy sector. 이승재, Arirang News.
People say one man's trash may be another man's treasure. Well, in the world of medicine, healthy microbes from human feces are reportedly being used for treatment purposes. Our Cho Sung-min explains.
Our digestive systems contain far more microbes than there are cells in our entire bodies. 90% of these organisms serve instrumental roles activating various bodily functions such as digestion and immune response. When the gut's condition deteriorates, useful microbes can die, which leads to certain diseases. These commonly include diarrhea and enteritis, while in more severe cases, the loss of microbes can lead to a fatal bacterial infection called Clostridium difficile. Recently, a biocompany in the U.S. received FDA approval for a treatment for this disease using human feces. The company extracted healthy microbes from feces and made a treatment they claim helps restore the patient's microbial balance.
Rebiotics is the first company to produce a standardized biologic product that may be helpful to treat recurrent Clostridium difficile infection, which can develop after taking antibiotics. RBX 2660 clinical product is a ready-to-use liquid microbial suspension for enema delivery.
While it's the world's first microbe-based treatment to be officially approved, a number of projects are already in the pipeline to develop new biological products using microbes. A company in Korea has recently finished a clinical trial for a colon cancer treatment made with healthy bacteria.
This is a strain that shows anti-cancer effects against colon cancer. By testing various strains, we verified that it improves and activates immune cells.
Another local firm is currently developing a microbial treatment for psoriasis. Industry experts are hopeful that as more companies develop treatments with microbes, they will achieve many medical breakthroughs for incurable diseases. 조성민, Arirang News.
Also, on the local front, young people are venturing into rural environments to breathe fresh life into agricultural activities. Our Chung Won-ju has details.
The South Korean countryside, facing a labor shortage, has lately been attracting more young people who take up farming and use local agricultural products to make processed foods. In this greenhouse, workers sort, wash, steam, and compress sesame seeds. The sesame oil and perilla oil that comes from the compressor is special because it's produced in the traditional way, which uses minimal heat and pressure, unlike conventional methods that roast the seeds over a strong fire. Cosmetics, bread, and noodles made of sesame and perilla seeds are also popular.
We're developing a variety of products with well-chosen domestic sesame seeds that young people will want to eat too.
Another factory uses green rice as its main ingredient for rice porridge. Gangado Island is known for harvesting rice before it's ripe when it's green. Green rice is rich in nutrients such as vitamin C and beta-glucan and is easy to digest. This factory differentiated itself from large companies and found success by producing 50 types of porridge using green rice.
We distribute certified organic processed food as a differentiating strategy because large corporations can't do that. We got an organic food certification in August and are now producing organic porridge.
There are currently about 15,000 young farmers nationwide. The government plans to increase this to 30,000 by 2027 and provide them with customized support.
We will support passionate and creative young farmers by expanding sales channels and distributing new varieties so they can become competitive and develop stably.
Young farmers with fresh ideas and passion are expected to become the future of South Korea's agricultural development. Chung Won-ju, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on the cultural front, Arirang is heading to Australia. The musical Ari Arari, made by the Cheongsan Arirang Culture Foundation, will take part in this year's Adelaide Fringe Festival, which runs from March 6th to the 19th. Ari Arari is a musical based on the Korean traditional song Arirang, originating from the county of Cheongsan-gun in Gangwon-do Province. Arirang is on the UNESCO list of intangible cultural assets. Meanwhile, the Adelaide Fringe Festival is the biggest annual arts and performance event in the Southern Hemisphere, with more than 1,200 shows.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the United States, the country's northeast is bracing for what could be the coldest weather in decades. Local weather services are forecasting wind chill so cold it could cause frostbite in less than 10 minutes. They have warned residents from Pennsylvania to Maine to stay indoors and have labeled the weather a once-in-a-generation cold. This, as predictions show, wind chill temperatures from Friday to Saturday local time could potentially drop as low as -46 degrees Celsius. The warning comes after an ice storm on Thursday left around 500,000 people without power across the southern states of Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. Cold conditions there over the past several days have killed at least 8 people and led to thousands of flight cancellations. Turning over to Europe now, where two lawmakers in the EU Parliament had their immunity removed on Thursday local time amid an ongoing corruption probe. Italian Andrea Cozzolino and Belgian Mark Tarabella can now be questioned by prosecutors over allegations of taking bribes from Qatar and Morocco in a bid to influence EU Parliament. The scandal erupted in December and saw 4 people charged on the same allegations. Among those arrested was one of the European Parliament's vice presidents, Eva Kaili. So far, over $1.6 million in cash has been recovered over a series of raids in Belgium and Italy. The so-called Qatargate scandal has rocked the EU. Qatar and Morocco have denied any wrongdoing. Australia's $5 banknote is set to get a makeover. The current design features the late Queen Elizabeth II, but Australia's central bank said on Thursday local time that rather than replace her with King Charles III, it would use a design that honours the culture and history of Indigenous Australians. The new design will take a few years to implement. In the meantime, the current design will still be printed and will remain legal tender even after the new banknote is released. It is the only note that featured the late Queen, and images of the monarchy will still remain on coins. The move comes amid growing questions of whether the former British colony should remain a constitutional monarchy. And finally, French national team defender Raphael Varane has announced his retirement from international football. The Manchester United player said on Thursday that his decision comes after thinking on it for a few months. He will instead focus on his club career. Since making his debut 10 years ago, the 29-year-old player has appeared 93 times for the national side, scoring 5 goals. He was part of the French squad that won the 2018 World Cup in Russia. Varane's exit comes less than a month after France's captain and goalkeeper Hugo Lloris announced his international retirement. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Temperatures remain chilly, starting off below freezing this morning, but most parts are having a seasonal afternoon, and we'll see things warming up from tomorrow, which is Ipchun, the start of spring on the traditional calendar. From a cloudy morning to a sunny afternoon with normal to good air quality nationwide. However, Ulleungdo and Dokdo are forecast to see a mix of rain and snow from late this afternoon into tonight. Meanwhile, dry air along the east coast gets worse, with more regions now under dry weather advisory. So if you're planning on going hiking or camping in eastern regions this weekend, be extra careful with anything that could start a fire, please. Now, the weather should be nice though from tomorrow. Saturday is Ipchun and Sunday is Taeborim, when we can see the first full moon of the new year on the lunar calendar. Skies will remain clear on Sunday, so we won't have much of a problem checking it out. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that ends Friday's afternoon newscast. But do join us for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.